Hi Cindy, and thank you and welcome to our webinar around Beyond Talent Acquisition, why focusing on employee engagement is critical to reaching your DEI goals. I'm Rainey Gill, VP of Marketing at eFinancialCareers. Cindy, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rainey. Hello to you and hello to everyone who is watching. My name is Cindy Joseph. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the founder and CEO of the C-Suite. We're a talent management consultancy focused very laser-like on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives within organizations. I am excited to be here to talk about employee engagement today.
Fantastic. So moving on to that, so why is employee engagement important? And in what ways do diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives intersect with employee engagement efforts?
Thank you. That is a great place to start. There are lots of important reasons to pay attention to employee engagement. When organizations have low engagement, we see things like decreased performance, where people aren't as motivated to work at high levels of performance. People are more likely to leave, or if they do stay, they can have a negative attitude toward the company or company goals. And ultimately, these challenges impact the bottom line. The company Gallup released a study in 2022 indicating that low employee engagement can cost $8.8 trillion globally in lost productivity each year. On the flip side, when companies do pay attention and invest in engagement, the opposite effects can absolutely be true. There are also a lot of benefits to things like company culture, customer satisfaction, and something that I think is very relevant to your viewers and listeners, attracting talent. Companies that have a brand reputation for being a great place to work, whether through industry reports or word of mouth, they have an easier time attracting talent their way. So this should be top of mind for any employer, regardless of the job market. When I consider your second question around the link to DEI, these two goals go hand in hand, really. It's difficult to have high levels of engagement if you're not going to engage everyone. So a focus on DEI ensures that all employees at least have the opportunity to feel seen, valued, respected, and engaged. And we know there are lots of examples of this. When we focus on making sure our spaces and work environments can support the most marginalized, we're often creating systems, programs, and policies that benefit everyone.
So the report we'll be partnering on will focus on engagement throughout the employee life cycle. I'm really interested to understand the importance of looking at it like that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of organizations think about engagement starting with the recruitment process, and it can certainly begin there. Sometimes even before that, if the company has a strong enough brand identity, but it can't end there. Once a person becomes an employee, over time, sometimes even immediately, they're evaluating their experience and how they feel about contributing to an organization. So one point that is important to drive home is that all of those values and culture talking points, all of the messaging around inclusion and belonging that's often touted during the recruitment cycle, they need to already be part of the fabric of the organization. So I know a lot of organizations put quite a bit of weight on recruiting as the foundation of their talent strategy. Well, if we think about this, recruiting takes quite a bit of effort and it's expensive. It's the cost of job advertisements, it's recruiters, search firms. We're doing orientation programs, and then it's rare that someone is fully productive right out of the gate. So if those individuals leave because of poor engagement, I want you to consider what has been lost for the organization. Part of the goal of this next report that we're doing together is to highlight where companies can proactively build engagement and belonging. So it's weaved into operations and practices. It's weaved into the culture first. And then that allows companies to more honestly and accurately communicate how they welcome all groups in the hiring process and beyond. So we're going to break down key parts of the employee life cycle and help employers to consider what are those practices, initiatives, or programs that can be put in place to help team members feel connected, motivated, and recognized. And that includes everything from hiring to onboarding, learning and development, performance management, even the exit process, how each of these unfolds for team members gives a lot of opportunity for engagement.
So moving on from that, how can financial services organisations strategically approach D&I to create a more inclusive and equitable work environment for their employees? And what would you say are sort of the top 3 action points for companies to boost employee engagement?
Great question. And I'm going to take those 2 questions in one go because I think they're very much related. There are lots of ways to consider boosting DEI and employee engagement, and I'm sure lots of thought leaders will have their own top list that they can share. So for me, I think engagement starts with leadership, and I'm not only talking about senior leaders, but also managers. They have so much influence on the experience and engagement of their direct reports. And there are studies that will tell you managers account for 70% or up to 70%, I should say, of employee engagement scores. So my first action is to focus on managers, who is selected or promoted to manage other people, what skills or qualities they should have, and certainly invest in training your managers. I have personally spoken to so many people who say that they were never given direction or training on how to manage other people. And yet a manager's ability to delegate properly, to give clear and unbiased feedback, to offer the right development opportunities, to not pick favorites, so on and so on, that has so much impact on their direct reports' growth and engagement. So I would 100% start there. The second action would be not only to ask for feedback, but then to listen and do something about it and communicate what you're doing. I have supported organizations where there is survey fatigue because people are asked for their perspective, but then don't necessarily see any changes. And that can send the message that their opinions don't really matter, or they shouldn't bother engaging in these surveys or other workplace culture initiatives. On the other end, when people feel that their feedback is taken seriously, even if it's not addressed 100%, that offers some good faith that they're valued and they're being met part of the way. So even if it's just a few pieces of feedback that can be addressed, I recommend taking those surveys seriously and reporting back in terms of what is being done with the feedback. And then my third one would be, do not forget about development. That is a big part of engagement. People want to feel challenged and that there's growth or opportunity for them if they want to pursue it. And they can often check out if they're not getting opportunities to learn, to go to training, to take on new work, or to be promoted. Obviously, those opportunities need to be balanced with performance and workload and bandwidth, but I would proactively consider programs and opportunities to help everyone develop their skills and learn about themselves personally and professionally. So take that into consideration. I would also lump in mentorship programs in that development strategy, everything from formal mentoring, matching programs, mentoring circles, leadership development, reverse mentoring. There are lots of ways to consider mentorship, but that has been shown in particular. There have been studies that show for women and people of color that can help boost them into management. So I think those are great ways to engage people and boost their motivation to keep going.
Excellent, and thank you so much for those recommendations. They're really meaningful. Is there any more you would possibly suggest?
Yeah, I think recognition is important. I think the most obvious type of recognition is compensation, bonuses, things of that nature, especially in finance. But there's certainly more to it than that. Obviously, people should be paid what they're worth and paid equitably to peers who are doing the same work. That goes without saying. Beyond that, you can consider how you validate and appreciate people for hard work and strong performance. I think positive feedback, reinforcement feedback goes a long way. Giving awards or a shout out in a visible form can motivate some people. Offering professional development as a reward can be great, like giving someone the opportunity to attend a conference or an event that they're really interested in. And sometimes even a thank you can feel really, really good. And we don't always remember to do that. The last thing I would say about recognition is not everyone is motivated by the exact same things. So I would be mindful to get to know your employees to understand what options you have in helping them to feel meaningfully recognized. And then one more I would add, I know many people who engage with eFinancialCareers do that for help with recruiting. So as it relates to the recruiting process, companies, recruiters, hiring managers can be proactive in setting up systems that help them to boost candidate engagement. So systems for engagement and hiring would include things like checking that jobs are posted with a diverse set of sourcing channels, right? And that messaging is welcoming and inclusive. I always appreciate when I see postings that explicitly invite people of all groups or people of underrepresented groups to apply. That is a welcoming call in message that boosts engagement. The employer brand should also reflect the diversity of the organization and highlight how the organization welcomes and supports all employees. If there are benefits that support communities who have been historically underrepresented or whose needs have not been historically considered, I would highlight those benefits. You could have goals for including a diverse group of people on the interview panel so candidates can see themselves represented. You could also try connecting people with ERGs, employee resource groups, affinity groups, or other volunteers so that they can ask questions about a range of day in the life experiences. And I would also think about setting up standard operating procedures for keeping the interview process moving, and also consider how responsive you are to candidates and their questions. So being mindful to be as communicative as you can be, as is reasonable. I know we're all busy, but those things can certainly help with the candidate engagement experience and can help attract and hire a more diverse group of people.
Excellent. So lots of action points there to be considered. So I'd like to move on to sort of talking around sort of frameworks and external factors impacting DEI initiatives. And specifically, I know in the US, there's been a lot of focus and questions around last year's Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in university admissions. I'd like to know, how might this impact organisations' DEI efforts for financial services companies?
Yeah. I think this is a big looming question on a lot of minds, and I'm not sure that we fully understand all of the implications just yet. There are a few immediate and high potential impacts that I can offer from my perspective, having been in this space, having read a lot about it, and certainly having had a lot of conversations with my clients. So first, there is the legal uncertainty that is a factor. The Supreme Court's decision raises questions around DEI efforts in the workplace, even though employment laws, they haven't necessarily changed. Having said that, I think there is some fear, or at least open questions, that it could prompt challenges and lawsuits against race or identity conscious programs. So there is a fear of heightened scrutiny, and programs that are very visible may become a target, maybe not necessarily from the courts, but from those who will use them to try to declare these types of initiatives unlawful. I think we're starting to see, at least here in the US, a bit of a retreat, or at least a reevaluation of existing initiatives. There have been several articles recently about some bulge bracket financial services firms pulling back on commitments that they had previously made, or opening up programs that were once geared for people of color, women, now being open to people of any background. I think we're seeing a reduction in investments and resources allocated to DEI initiatives as well, which can impact things like diversity recruitment, retention, and promotion strategies at work. So we'll see where this goes. You know, in some ways, the groups that were already underrepresented, historically excluded, or lacked access and resources, those are the ones who are most impacted by a reduction in investment and resources in this space. My hope is that there are other strategies being considered or implemented to balance these recent decisions. I will share on the flip side, from my perspective, I've been part of a number of conversations and have clients who have remained headstrong and committed to the effort. The teams that I'm working with have continued to consider how they talk about DEI to ensure that it is inclusive and it brings as many people along as possible. They're considering how DEI is embedded in and aligns directly to their organizational goals and long-term priorities. They're also convening with others within the sector to engage in community problem solving and community commitments. And this work that's happening, it may not be as public or as visible, but the work continues on.
Okay. And given the dynamic nature of the financial services industry, how can organisations ensure that their DI initiatives remain both agile and adaptable to changes in the industry and the broader social landscape?
There are a few actions that I think are important to remain agile and adaptable in this space. And the world continues to change, our perspectives continue to evolve. And so that agility, I think, is going to be critical for organizations. I think starting with some key metrics is still important. So understanding your benchmark data in terms of who is at your organization, what are the hiring rates, promotion rates, and things of that nature, and then regularly assessing and reviewing what's working and what isn't. How are you doing relative to any KPIs, key performance indicators that you have set? And where do you need to adjust those KPIs as you learn more about your employees and the communities that you're committed to? I think is still a very important foundational step in doing this work meaningfully and impactfully. To the extent possible, I would build diverse representation into decision-making processes. When people are in positions of power, sometimes it's not always obvious how decisions impacting people who are not in power may land. And so asking who is not at the table, who should be at the table, and including those perspectives can help financial services companies be agile as lots of social and people-related issues are presented for them to address. Bringing other voices and opinions in, I think at a minimum, leaders and decision makers have the necessary inputs before choosing important actions. I mentioned some of my clients are reaching out to others within the same or adjacent industries for collaborative problem solving and support. This is also something that can help organizations remain agile. I remember when I was in finance myself, I was part of forums of other DEI leads, other recruiter groups. And we would get together and discuss what we were experiencing. We would share best practices. Your company may not have all of the answers on its own, but they can strategically choose to collaborate with other organizations, industry groups, community partners, to stay informed about new and innovative ideas and emerging trends in the space. And lastly, specific to hiring, I know many of your clients turn to you for guidance on hiring. Employers need to think about how they may need to adjust their recruiting and hiring practices in this landscape, particularly around assessing candidate qualifications and things of that nature. So to me, if diversity and representation is still an important goal, taking the time to consider what are the indicators of high performance, in some cases beyond traditional indicators like having attended a specific Ivy League university or something to that effect, that may need to be part of the process. I think for financial services companies in particular, there is a chance that some of the schools that have been on the target list of schools may see their demographics changing in years to come. And if those are feeders for junior level positions, finance may need to get more innovative and open about their sourcing channels and broaden their recruitment efforts to consider all of the ways, all of the places that people can acquire the necessary skills and experiences to ensure that they can identify and hire a diverse pool of qualified candidates. So I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well. How are we going to innovate and continue to challenge ourselves in light of what is happening around us in the social environment? So we just need to think a bit more innovatively about these efforts and really hone in on what motivates people, what engages all people, and in some cases rethink how to engage people around the topic of DEI.
Cindy, I'd love to get your opinion. It's something that is on the rise. Everyone is talking about it. It is the automation of AI in the workplace. And how can organizations leverage technology to enhance employee engagement rather than replace human interaction? And what are the potential pitfalls to avoid in this process?
This is a really good one. AI is everywhere today.
Yeah.
And if you're not engaging in AI, regardless of where you are in the business landscape, I think it can be to the detriment of forward progress in some ways. So we're already seeing AI being used in a number of ways within employee engagement. And I'll give a handful of examples of things that I've seen or have leveraged or worked with. So we can now think about using AI for personalized learning and development plans. No longer is it sort of a one size fits all. AI can help us parse through the needs of individuals. It can help summarize performance management and feedback for team members. It can rewrite job descriptions and make them more inclusive and attractive. AI chatbots for employee inquiries can get back to an employee often faster than a human can, especially if it's a simple question. And I've seen platforms where the results of engagement surveys might then lead the tool to recommend a course of action, interventions, and next steps without having to read pages and pages and pages of comments. And I say that personally triggered because I have had to do that many times over the course of my career. On the flip side, AI is still relatively new to the mainstream, and there are absolutely some things that we need to be careful about. One of the big concerns is that while it is not human, and we may think that it means that we're getting unbiased outcomes from AI tools, the data that AI pulls from was built and input by humans. And if we're not careful, we can not only perpetuate inequities and bias, we can actually scale them and make them worse. So I'll give a quick example. Years ago, Amazon had built this automated tool to help them select candidates for jobs. This tool had the intention of mitigating human bias and hopefully helping them to hire more women. But the inputs that the tool used to qualify candidates was existing data. And it turned out that the tool was eliminating qualified women because their applications or their resumes didn't have the same markers as prior hires had. Amazon had to shut down this particular initiative, right? So similarly, as we think about other places where this could happen, it's not enough to feed an AI tool a set of profiles of your existing leaders, for example. If your existing leaders all have the same background and identity makeup, subsequent applicants will likely be deemed not appropriate, not a match for advancement because their profiles are a bit different.
So how can companies navigate them effectively?
Yeah, there are ways to get around or navigate the pitfalls. I think we need to understand what inputs are powering the AI outputs so that we can mitigate biases in things like recruiting and performance management. Where we can, we should use a combination of what we know historically while we consider the inputs necessary to make sure AI is expanding our reach versus making the pool more exclusive. So for me, that means a little bit less focus on matching exact historical profiles and more focus on skills, knowledge, abilities that are important to the job, and what are all of the ways that those skills and abilities can potentially show up. That's the input that we need to feed into the system. So for those reasons and more, I think AI can't replace people when we're dealing with people and culture matters, at least not today. I think it can be a tool to speed up process, to help us brainstorm, help us analyze and summarize data and information, but there has to be a human check. One of the things that we can do in helping our companies use AI responsibly in the people and culture space would be to ask ourselves some important questions. So what are my goals for using AI? What are the important inputs or criteria that my tool needs in order to ensure it's being used inclusively and equitably? Does the AI output make sense based on all of the things that we can observe about our organization in real life, right? So we're not just taking what the tool tells us as the only source of truth. We're also looking at practically what are we seeing happening around us, and then have a representative group of people who are going to be impacted by the technology weighed in on the decision and the potential outcomes, right? Have we checked the outputs with the people who are going to use them or going to be impacted by them to understand if we need to make adjustments or tweak in any way.
So employee engagement, it's so important to drive internal organisational engagement. So I'd like to move on to this theme. And you know, how do you collect feedback from a diverse group of employees to continuously improve retention efforts? And then on top of that, sort of what are the key performance indicators or metrics would you recommend for assessing the success of DEI initiatives in financial services, particularly when we look in the terms of employer experience?
I'll start with your second question first, and then I'll come back around. Understanding those KPIs, the key performance indicators, I think that's the starting place, right? The metrics may not be 100% the same across firms. So I think each company needs to understand where they are, what their own specific goals are, their environment, and whatever factors would impact their specific business. That said, there are a few things that I would consider as far as measuring success. So definitely representation metrics in countries where you can collect or report on this. You can monitor demographic data at various levels of the organization, including diversity and leadership positions, as well as across different departments or teams, right? How is this shifting and hopefully improving over time? Across demographic groups, I would think about career levels, departments. I'd monitor and measure a few things. Hiring, promotion, and advancement rates. So you can consider are career progression opportunities equitable? Who is being considered and why? What are the potential barriers to advancement? Those are things that I would consider in those spaces. From a performance management perspective, are there any trends in how some groups are rated? Any specific feedback that seems to come out of one group versus another? Does everyone have the same or similar opportunity for meaningful feedback? These are all things that we can be tracking. Development opportunities, everything from training participation to who has access to receive mentorship or sponsorship, who gets high profile assignments and so on. All of these are development opportunities that can support advancement down the line. And then I would also be looking at retention rates. So what's the tenure of your employee group and who's staying, who's leaving, and why? These are some important things to measure and to have a good grasp on. You can also think about collecting feedback to continually improve. And going back to the first part of your question, I think there are different ways that you can do this. So we've talked a bit about surveys so far in the webinar. Anonymous surveys that include demographic data help you to analyze different experiences. So not only collectively are employees happy, satisfied, engaged, motivated, but does that data, does that experience differ by various groups? Focus groups and one-on-one interviews can help you get more in-depth qualitative insights into retention issues and potentially identify solutions. And then don't forget exit interviews, especially if there is a retention issue that you want to dig into. Exit interviews can be a place to ask what contributed to a person's decision to leave. It can help them identify underlying inclusion, management, or other engagement issues that might be contributing to turnover. And those insights, I think, can be helpful in informing retention strategies and highlight areas that you can be working on and improving.
Okay. And then what role do you think sort of employer resource groups or affinity networks play in supporting employees of various identities and fostering that really important sense of community?
Employee resource groups or affinity networks, they are critical to engagement, especially when we think about DEI work. They play an important role in supporting employees of various identities and fostering a sense of community within organizations. And done right, I think they do a number of things for organizations. They provide support and networking opportunities. They can be a safer space for employees to connect with others who share similar backgrounds or identities or experiences. They can get advice and build relationships in those types of safer spaces and forums. Employee resource groups help to raise awareness of issues that might be affecting their respective communities. So it's helpful in being able to advocate for policy changes and collaborate with leadership on important initiatives. They can support professional development, which we've been talking quite a bit about today. Some of them offer mentorship programs and skill building sessions. And they can also help with recruitment and development. Oftentimes, employee resource group members can serve as ambassadors for the organizations. I know when I was in financial services and consulting, recruiting partnered very, very closely with these teams to help with everything from identifying talent to representing the company at conferences and on campuses. They helped to interview, mentor people. They helped with the internship program and more. So there's a lot of opportunity for engagement with employee resource groups and affinity networks.
And then finally, I'd like to ask you, I mean, you spoke about the importance of leadership driving employee engagement, but to what extent is leadership involvement crucial in driving engagement? But also, what specific actions can leaders take to champion DI initiatives within financial services organizations?
Yeah, leadership involvement is so foundational in driving engagement and really driving the culture within all organizations, not the least of which is financial services. Regardless of corporate commitments and statements, more than anything, I think people are focused on their day-to-day experiences and how they're valued. And they're watching which behaviors and actions are championed, rewarded, tolerated, penalized. Those are the things that drive engagement. So I could name any number of things that leaders can be doing, but I'll just share 3 here as we close. At the top of my list, I think leaders should lead by example. They should role model inclusive behaviors, invite and start dialogues about issues that people care about, champion psychological safety, and offer a seat at the table to employees from a whole host, a lot of different backgrounds. I completely understand advancement, change, those things can sometimes take time. At the same time, I've heard directly from employees within financial services firms that it's hard to stay the course when the entire leadership team, represents only 1 or 2 identities, or when they're not asked for their perspectives on important issues that impact them. So leaders can consider who they're making space for, who they're inviting into key conversations, and who they're visibly championing. I think role modeling and being very visible about it is important. The second thing I think that is important for leaders is to integrate DEI into business strategies and operations. And integrate is used very intentionally here. It should be a natural part of strategic planning and decision-making frameworks across the organization so that everyone knows and understands how key decisions are made. And the fact that DEI is part of it is just how business is done within their company versus having it be this standalone additional process that can be included or discarded at any time, right? So for example, if a financial services company has done work to expand its hiring sources, it has considered the various experiences that can help candidates develop critical skills beyond solely traditional experiences. And if the interview process naturally includes standardized interviews and interviewers who are not allowed to deviate from that, you don't need a separate diversity interviewing process. You are naturally interviewing in a way that will support your diversity goals. So I think that is something from a mindset and a strategy perspective. If we can integrate and operationalize DEI, then we don't necessarily need to have all these extra programs. And then finally, this is a big one for me. Leaders have power, influence, and authority to do some very specific things. And when I say specific things, I mean allocating budgets, allocating resources. There's literally nothing that you do in business that is important to your business that you wouldn't have strategy, budget, KPIs, et cetera, attached. And so leaders need to think about what can they do in terms of their authority and influence in this space. They also have the ability to make changes to company policy, right? So I'm not saying that every single change is possible or that there aren't limits to their authority, but being careful to use that power to continue to adequately resource the initiatives that the company says it's committed to is going to be key. For me, there's a gulf between writing a blank check without any checks and balances versus eliminating DEI initiatives and elite DEI teams all at once, which we've seen quite a bit of over the last year or two. So for progress to be achieved, companies have to be more discerning in how they continue to appropriately fund and strategize DEI work. And leaders have a critical role to play in that. They can really help to make sure that these decisions are being made thoughtfully.
Well, thank you so much, Cindy. I've certainly learned so much from our chat today. There's tons of insight, lots of action points that we can definitely take away to help create a more inclusive and equitable working environment. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I hope this has been helpful.